Okay, so this the Bible study that we're going to have today is going to be on the end times according to Jesus. And as I mentioned earlier, I am going to do this Bible study. Um, I'm going to try. There's a lot of reading to do, so I'm going to be reading all the verses, and I want you guys to keep up. However, I want you guys just to kind of uh, as we read, I'm going to highlight certain details because you guys know that I'm a stickler for details. So when I go through this study, I want you to follow along, and Rick is going to have some Bible verses for you, and we're going to be reading from the three Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. These are the synoptic Gospels, okay? Uh, the Matthew's gospel is the longest of the three gospels with regards to the end times because Jesus actually says quite a bit, even though we don't often combine the teachings of the end times with a lot of parables that Jesus gives. In this case, this actually is applicable. Jesus actually says a lot about the end times, but many of the things that he says oftentimes has to be deciphered based on the things that he's saying. And what I want you guys to pay attention to is how in all of these gospels, um, you're going to notice that Jesus is talking to specific people at certain times, and not everything is as it seems. Even though it might seem that way, we're going to do our best to highlight the differences to make sure that everybody understands exactly where things fit. Okay, so. The first, the Gospels that we're going to look at are Matthew chapter 24, Mark chapter 13, and Luke chapter 21. Okay. Now, the first one that we're going to read, we're obviously going to start at Matthew, and the Gospel of Matthew is where most of I think that we're going to find that there's so much written in Matthew that we might overlook the details, but I think that the as if we focus on these details, you're going to find that there's a lot more to the end times. And again, I'm going to address something uh, in this study where I just want to kind of put it all out there right from the get-go. Okay. Um, we are going to talk about the end times, having to do specifically with the topic of the rapture. Um, there are a great deal of debate and discussion and arguments from people who hold different positions on the end times, namely either pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib. Those are the official um, terms. And of course, we also have the pan-trib, which means that it'll pan out in the end. Who knows what's going to happen? That's how some people view it. And because it's so confusing, we hear so many different things. And so the problem that we have is that everybody is they're camped in one of those three. Okay. They're either hardline pre-trib or hardline mid-trib or hardline post-trib. And the problem that I see with camping in any one of those is that uh, I see biblical evidence for all three. And the thing is that when you park into one of those doctrines, you're going to have where somebody's pre-trib, they will quote the verses that defend their pre-trib doctrine, but they ignore the other verses that seem to show a post-trib. And then you have the same thing with mid-trib, they'll ignore the other positions, and post-trib, well, you know, everybody else is wrong, and post-trib is got to be right because that's the coming of Jesus right there. So the positions that people take are so dogmatic that they shut out the other positions as if they are completely wrong or invalid. And hopefully, what I'm going to show today is that all three positions are actually valid. And the text that we're going to use to demonstrate this is going to be the words of Jesus himself. Because once you start paying attention to the actual words of Jesus, suddenly your understanding of these things will actually change. So let's begin with the Gospels of Matthew, beginning at chapter 24, beginning at verse 1. Okay. So Rick has the verses here, and it says, Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one of these shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. Okay. Uh, again, as I'm reading, I want you guys to follow along because I'm going to highlight details that are going to be essential for you to understand where we're going with this. Okay. Now, on verse 3, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus answered and said to them, Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended and will betray one another and will hate one another, when many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end, shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And I pray that your flight be made not in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh should be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, Lo, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, Look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. And immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now I'm gonna pause it here, up to this point here, only because now from this point forward, he gets into the parable of the fig tree. But actually, in fact, you know what? Let's continue with the parable of the fig tree, only because I'm gonna go somewhere with this. This says, now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch is has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know the summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour knows no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man be. For as the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. When the two men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour that your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken up into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Who then is that wise and faithful servant, whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly, I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of. And will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, this chapter in Matthew, uh, it doesn't end here. There's actually a second, the next chapter over in Matthew 25 is he actually continues specifically with this teaching. So I want you to keep in mind that he's still talking about these things. Okay, he's still talking about the end times. It says, then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now, five of them were wise, five were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight, a cry was heard, behold, the bridegroom was coming, going out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But he answered, saying, no, lest there should not be enough for us and to you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went in to buy, the bridegroom came, and those that were ready and with him went to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterwards, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, surely I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know not whether the day or the hour in the which the Son of Man is coming. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them, and took one he gave, and to one he gave 5 talents, to another two, and to another one, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. And he went, and when he had received the 5 talents, he went and traded with them and made other 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received two gained two more also. But he who had received one went and dug into the ground, and hid his lord's money. After a long time, the lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received the 5 talents came and brought the 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents beside them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you have delivered me to 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents beside them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things, and I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground, and look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered him and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For everyone who has more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a sheep divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. When the king shall say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous answered him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and came to you? And the king will answer and say to them, Surely I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. Then he would also say to those on his left hand, Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. I was a stranger and you did not take me in. Naked and you did, and I'm sorry, naked and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison and you did not visit me. And they also will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or stranger or naked or sick in prison and we did not minister to you? And he will answer them, saying, Surely when I say to you, as much as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Now, that is the Gospel of Matthew. Okay. That is up to this verse is where the end times discussion, this is where it ends. So it's actually two full chapters in the Gospel of Matthew. Okay. And so with that, I want you, I'm sure every single one of you can say that this is a mouthful. This is enormous amount of information. And it is. And if you feel overwhelmed, don't worry, it's being recorded. You can go back and read it. You can read it on your own. But I want you guys to just be to focus that in the Gospel of Matthew, he goes two full chapters. In the next gospel, okay, you're going to notice some differences. In the Gospel of Mark, it's a much shorter verse. As a matter of fact, a lot of the parables that Jesus talks about in Matthew, you don't find in Mark or even Luke for that matter. As a matter of fact, most of those that you see in Matthew are completely omitted here in Mark. In Mark, however, even though it is shorter and it is condensed, he does provide some minor details that are really significant. And especially when we begin to take account of these. So let's read now from Mark chapter 13, beginning at verse 1. Then, as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, Teacher, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. Jesus answered and said to him, Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, and John and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when these things will be fulfilled? Jesus answering them, Jesus answering began to say, Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and will deceive many. But when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be troubled, for such things must happen, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be earthquakes in various places, and there'll be famines and troubles, and these are the beginnings of sorrows. But watch out for yourselves, for they will deliver you up to the councils, and you will be beaten in the synagogues. You will be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. And when they arrest you and deliver you up, do not worry beforehand or premeditate what you will speak. But whatever is given to you in that hour, speak that, for it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. Now, brother will betray brother to death, and father his child, and children rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated for all but for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. Then let those which are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down into the house or enter to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And I pray that your flight be not in winter. For in those days there will be tribulation, such as has not been since the creation of which God created until this time, no nor ever shall be. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh, sorry, it's moving, sorry, lost my place. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened the days. Then, if anyone says to you, Lo, look, here is Christ, or look, he is there, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. But take heed, see, I have told you all things beforehand. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the stars of heaven will fall. I'm sorry, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars of heaven will fall, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. And then he will send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds and the farthest part of the earth to the farthest part of heaven. Now, learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branches already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will not by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour knows no one knows, not even the angels in heaven or the Son, but the Father, but only the Father. Take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. It is like a man going to a far country who left his house and gave authority to his servants to each his work and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the cock crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he finds you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch. That is the complete narration or narrative of the end times according to Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. Now, I want to go back a little bit to the Gospel of Matthew and Mark to highlight some major differences, okay, that you may have overlooked only because I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of times when we read these passages in the Gospels, we oftentimes make the presumption that the things that we're reading are all the same thing. So, the details don't really matter. It's just that people decided to write down what they remember. So, because it's not identical, it makes the Bible more reliable and truthful. And so, we sometimes we like overlook the details, like, oh, well, it's there. He's talking about the same thing. And the problem with that is that when we ignore the details, we end up shooting ourselves in the foot. And all of those details are where the secrets are kept. It's in the details that the mystery is actually revealed. And so whenever we go into these passages and we just simply superimpose one gospel on top of another and assume it's all the same thing, we overlook the details and end up missing out on what Jesus is actually trying to tell us, because it is because of that approach that people have settled into one camp, either post-trib or pre-trib or mid-trib or any trib. Okay? Because they just assume, well, this is talking about that time. That's just the way it's going to be, or this is how this is how it says it. So therefore, it's the same here. But then when you look at another gospel and there's some minor differences, like it's all the same thing. Do not generalize. When you're reading the Bible, pay attention to the details, because sometimes the details will give, actually, a lot of times, it'll give you a great deal of insight and revelation about what Jesus is saying. So, in the Gospel of Matthew, and I want to start right at the beginning of, again, of the Gospel of Matthew, and I want to address, first of all, where Jesus goes in Matthew 25, beginning at verse 1, or 24, verse 1. Okay. It says that Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. So I want you to just recognize that Jesus was in the temple and left the temple. Okay? He has left the temple. And if you keep reading, it says in verse 3, it says that he sat on the mountain of Olives. So the mountain of Olives is situated outside, okay, the temple, and it's opposite. It's actually facing away from opposite of the temple. So he's not in the temple. He is sitting out by the mountain of Olives. It mentions that Jesus he left the temple and his disciples came to him. It doesn't give us a number of disciples. It doesn't give us any details as to who is speaking to him. It just says that his disciples came to him and they posed him a question. It says, do these things they were showing him things about the buildings of the temple. Okay. And Jesus he tells them, he says, look, I don't you see all these things? And surely I tell you, not one stone will be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. And then they, when he sits down on the Mount of Olives, his disciples come to him privately. Okay, so this is a private discussion between him and his disciples. We don't know exactly how many here because Matthew doesn't tell us this. Okay. However, they asked him three questions. They asked him, number one, tell us when will these things be? Okay. Number two, uh, I'm sorry, you're moving around too much. Just keep it still on the page for just a minute. Okay. Says now, it says, he sent them out. He says, tell us when will these things be? That's number one. What will be the sign of your coming? That's number two, and of the end of the age. So they're asking him three things. Technically, the last one, the last two questions are kind of like combined, right? Where you have the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. But there's two things kind of bundled up in one. Okay. So you have these three questions. Jesus proceeds to respond and he tells them a series of events. And he says, take heed that no one deceive you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and will deceive many. You can go ahead and start scrolling up now. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must first come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginnings of sorrow. So everything that Jesus says, from the moment he says, take heed that no one deceives you, all the way up to this point, this is all bundled up as the beginnings of sorrows, okay? Or the beginning of sorrows. Now, the word sorrows here is the same word for when a woman goes into labor. Okay, he's saying these are the beginning of the birth pangs. Okay, so I want you to jumble that up because this is really important. When he goes, take it that no one deceives you. Many years are going to come in my name. You're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. You're going to have famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. These are the beginnings of sorrows. Okay. And now look at the next verse. He says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated. So that this follows the next, after the beginnings of sorrows, you have the next series of things that are going to happen, and you're going to find there's a certain chronology. It's just going one thing after the other. It says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation, right? Verse 10, and then many will be offended and will betray one another. And then verse 11, then many false prophets. All right. And you keep seeing this progression that this will happen, then this will happen, and this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. So Matthew tells you A, B, C, D, all of these things are gonna come to pass. All right. And they come to a certain thing. And the thing is that you look at the structure of Matthew and compare it to Mark, they're basically the same gospels in the sense of the basic order of events. All right. And they both follow the same exact things. As a matter of fact, if you uh, go a little bit further down in Matthew to verse 15, if you could scroll it up real quick, um, it says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, wherever reads, let him understand. This is also in Mark. Okay. So these are what we have in Matthew and Mark are basically they're following the same trajectory. Okay, they're all going along the same path of of orientation and chronology. Right, this will go, and then this happens, and then this happens, and this happens, and then you keep going. And when it gets down, you'll see here. If you go a little bit further down, go like to verse 20. Let's see here. Okay, go to verse 29. It says that they will see immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will get of its light, stars will fall from heaven, the powers of heaven will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear. The tribes will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and glory. And then he sends his angels with the sound of a trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds. That's again the same kind of language that we see in Matthew is also in the Gospel of Mark. Now, if you could go to the Gospel of Mark real quick, I want to start just showing you some similarities that we've already covered, but I also want to point out some minor details that you may have missed. Okay. So in Mark chapter 13, verse 1, it says that he went out of the temple. We read that in Matthew, and one of his disciples said to him, so his disciples all go with him out of the temple, but one of the disciples says to him, Teacher, see what manner of stones and what the buildings are here. Right? So in Matthew, it only highlights disciples and it says that they spoke with him. In Mark, it says, okay, it was one specific disciple that said to him, excuse me. And then in verse 2, he basically gives them the similar answer. Do you see not these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. And then it says again, so we know that he's in the same place, right? As he sat on the mountain of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately. So now we have a more defined group of people. Peter, James, John, and Andrew. So we know now that there are at least four disciples, okay, that are actually asking him questions. And this is the question that they ask him in Mark. Tell us, when will these things be? Question number one. And what will be the sign when all these things be fulfilled? That's where you have those last two questions that are kind of combined, but just one. It's more or less the same structure, but it's still the same thing. Okay. And again, we see the same details that Jesus goes, right? So Jesus in verse 5 says, Jesus answering them began to say, Take heed that no one deceives you. What is this the beginning of? What did Jesus call that in the Gospel of Matthew? Hello? What did can anybody answer real quick? What did Jesus call this period when he says, Take heed that no man deceives you? What is this period called?
Is that the beginning of sorrows?
Beginnings of sorrows, right? And if you keep reading from I'm sorry, from verse 5 and go down to verse 9 or 10, if you can scroll down, okay? Nation shall rise, actually, verse 8, sorry. It says, Nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes in various places. There will be famines and troubles. These are the beginnings of sorrow. So far, Matthew and Mark are following the same trajectory. Okay. And he continues, says, but watch out for yourselves, for they will deliver you up to the councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues. You will be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony to them. And the gospel must first be preached into all nations. Okay. But when they arrest you, deliver you up, do not worry beforehand and premeditate what you will speak, but whatever is given you in that hour, that speak that, for it is not you who speaks, but the Holy Spirit. Now, brother will betray brother to death. See, he's giving a detail. In Matthew, he just says they're going to do this to you, this to you, this to you. And in Mark, he adds these little caveats. He says, and when they do arrest you and they deliver you up, don't premeditate beforehand what you're going to say, right? It doesn't really give these kind of details in Matthew, but again, I digress. And he continues, brother will put your brother to death, father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. So far, Matthew and Mark are along the same trajectory, and you will be hated for all by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. And again, we see that in both Matthew and Mark, it's about enduring to the end, right? Because why? Because the question that they asked was about what? The end of the age, right? They're talking about the when are those things that he mentioned are going to happen, when is going to be the sign of his coming and of the end of the world or the end of the age. So this is all in answer to that question. And again, in Mark, we see in verse 14 about the abomination of desolation. So these are huge markers of history. Okay, these are points in history like, okay, this is talking about the same event, right? The abomination of desolation. And if you haven't read it, that's in the prophet Daniel writes about, he calls it the abomination that makes desolate. Okay. So that's a period of time where the Antichrist is supposedly going into the temple and does a bunch of things. And what's interesting, a lot of people uh, believed for a while that this was referring to um, the time of, I believe it's Antiochus Epiphanes, all right, where Antiochus Epiphanes was before the time of Jesus, like at least a couple hundred years, 200 or 300 years, where he took a pig and slaughtered it on the altar, which basically initiated the Maccabean revolt. Okay, this is where the Jews rose up against the Romans and eventually ended up in their destruction at Masada. Okay, so uh, a lot of people thought, well, that must have been the fulfillment of Daniel, but yet when you get to this portion in both Matthew and Mark, Jesus is talking about the abomination of desolation as yet future. So we know that the event was mimicked by Antiochus Epiphanes in the past from this point in the conversation. But Jesus is making reference to a future event where this is still going to happen. So even though people believe that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled that in Daniel, Jesus is saying, no, this is still future. This is still yet to come. So both Matthew and Mark affirm the abomination of desolation as a future event. Okay. And again, you go down and he talks about let him who's in the field not go back to get his clothes, woe to him who are pregnant or to those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight be made not in winter. For those days there will be tribulation such as not been since the beginning of the creation, which God created until this time, nor ever shall be. What I want you to focus on as far as from this at this point, okay, is that Matthew and Mark are going along the same trajectory. You go further down into the Gospel of Mark, where he talks about the second coming, and everything is the same. Everything is going along, and he uses the same language about the angels going to the four corners to gathering his elect. Okay, that is what I want you to see how that both Matthew and Mark are going along the same trajectory. All right. Now we're going to go to something else. So I want you to focus. Now, I want you to remember in Matthew and Mark, it starts off with a section about that's called the beginning of sorrows, and then it's followed by a sequence of events. One thing follows after the other. This will happen, then this will happen, and this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. And it goes all the way down. Okay? So when you keep all of this in mind, now you're going to have to, now we're going to look at the third gospel, the gospel of Luke. And this is where the wrench is going to be thrown into your gears because everything that we're going to read here is going to sound the same, but it's not. And what I want you to notice here is that because Jesus uses similar words and structures to talk about similar events, but he's not referring to identical timelines. Talking about different times, different things, but he uses similar patterns of communication, which is why I think a lot of people get confused. They use the things that he says in one gospel and assumes, oh, he's talking about it the same. Well, Matthew and Mark are obviously, then well, obviously Luke must be the same. And what we're going to notice here is completely different. Okay. So before we go to Luke 21, if you could do me a favor, go back to Luke chapter 20 in verse 1. I just want to show you one quick thing, okay? Luke chapter 20, verse 1. This is actually the beginning of this conversation that goes into Luke 21, okay? And I want you to notice something. It says, now it happened on one of those days as he taught the people in the temple and preached the gospel that the chief priests and scribes together with the elders confronted him. So, where is Jesus here in the gospel of Luke? Somebody. What does it say here where Jesus is at?
He's in the temple.
He's in the temple. So in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, he's outside the temple sitting on the Mountain of Olives. Okay? The Gospel of Luke, he's in the temple. So during the day, Jesus teaches in the temple, and at night, he resorts to the Mountain of Olives. All right. So in the Mountain of Olives, who was speaking to Jesus? Guys, can you do me a favor? If everyone can,
Disciples.
yeah, the disciples, if everyone can unmute their computers for this one, because I'm going to be asking questions on this one to make sure that everybody is on point here, okay? When it comes to the his discussion here with the disciples in Matthew and Mark, here in Luke, he's talking to the people. He is having a discussion in the Gospel of Luke. He is talking to all the people, including the religious leadership. Okay, the chief priests and the scribes, together with the elders and all the people there, because he's talking to the people, and the elders are now confronting him. So this is a different crowd at a different time of the day in a different location. That should already tell you that this is not the same discussion. Okay? So let's now go to the next chapter, Luke chapter 21, because now we're going to pick up and we're going to see that Jesus is still in the temple. Okay? It says that he looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. So the treasury is in the temple. Okay? And he saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. So he said, truly, I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all. For all these out of their abundance have put in their offerings for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had. Then, as some spoke of the temple, now mind you, he's still in the temple. It says, as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations. He said, so again, this is sounds the same or similar to what was said in Matthew and Mark. But Matthew and Mark is a separate conversation that is a private conversation with his disciples. This one in Luke, he's having a public conversation, public, okay, with the people and the chief priests and the elders and the scribes. He's in the Gospel of Luke, it's a much broader crowd, and his place is in the temple, not on the Mountain of Olives, okay? And look at what Jesus says here. These things which you see, the days will come in which one stone shall not be left upon another, that shall not be thrown down. So, in the timeline, this conversation in Luke happens earlier in the day. Matthew and Mark come to, or Matthew and Mark are private conversations where they're rehashing with Jesus because he said something in Matthew and Mark that is different from what we're reading here. And you're going to see that. Okay. So, whatever he says here in Luke is prompting them to have a discussion for clarity in Matthew and Mark. Okay. So, I would just make sure you keep that in your focus. So, they asked him, Teacher, when will these things be? And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place? This is really important. This question that the people are asking him is not about the end times. This is what's important. They're not asking him about the end times. They're asking him about the temple. Whereas in Matthew and Mark, they're asking specifically what sign will, when will these things happen? And when is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Matthew and Mark, the disciples are specifically asking about the end times, whereas here in Luke, they're just asking him about the temple. And then he answers them like this, and he said, take heed that you be not deceived. So when he says this, what was this called in Matthew and Mark when he starts saying this?
The suffering.
Specifically, what does he call this period? Jamal, you said it earlier. It's called the beginnings of sorrows.
The beginning of sorrows.
Beginning of sorrows. So
All
he
right.
says, take heed that you be not deceived. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am he, the time that draws near. Therefore, do not go after them. But you shall hear wars and commotions. Do not be terrified, for these things must come to pass, but the end will not come immediately. And he's already telling you this is going to be something that is not going to happen right away. And then he said to them, nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. This sounds familiar, right? This is exactly what he said about the beginnings of sorrows. And there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilences, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. So far, everything's about the beginnings of sorrows. However, look at the next verse. But before all these things, stop right there. In Matthew and Mark, everything that follows in the beginnings of sorrows, it follows after the beginnings of sorrows. This will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen, and this will happen. But in Luke, everything that he's about to say from here on forward happens before everything written in Matthew and Mark. This is before all these things. So, with that in mind, this should tell you, wait a minute, this is different. Because everything that he says for the rest of the time here in Luke, everything will happen before the beginnings of sorrows. He just told you, but before all these things, what are they going to do? Let's read. They will lay their hands on you and persecute you and deliver you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. But it will turn out to you for an occasion for testimony. For therefore settle it in your hearts not to meditate beforehand what you will answer. It sounds kind of like Matthew and Mark, particularly Mark. But we already know that this is happening before everything in Mark. Okay? Therefore settle it in your hearts, do not meditate beforehand what you will answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives, and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Sounds the same, but remember, this is all before that stuff. Okay? Yeah, I want to keep saying that. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But not a hair of your head shall be lost. By your patience, possess your souls. All right? Go ahead. Go bring it up. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that the desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Now, so far, it looks like, man, he's talking about Jerusalem. Is he talking about something future? Let's see exactly what timeline is he's talking about. But woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. Okay, so he is specifically addressing the land of Israel, and he's talking about the Jewish people. Okay, and it says, and listen to this, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the Gentiles be fulfilled. Oops. This here, this verse in verse 24, it says that they, the Jewish people, are going to fall by the edge of the sword. Everything that Jesus is saying up to this point is specifically dealing up to 70 AD. All right? He is addressing everything that would happen to those people up to 70 AD because it says that they would be led away captive into all nations. That happened in 70 AD. Okay? And the next half of this verse, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now, why is this important? Because in 70 AD, Titus Vespasian was a Roman general who ended up becoming emperor later. Okay. He attacks Jerusalem and destroys the temple in 70 AD. And the Jews are scattered Okay, I mean, a million Jews they die. Okay, in this conflict, and they get scattered in what's referred to as the diaspora. Okay, where they're scattered around the whole world, and that happened on 70 AD. So everything that Jesus is saying in Luke happened almost 2,000 years ago, up to this point. Okay, but he says something interesting. He says, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. This is what's interesting about this verse is that Jerusalem was trampled by Gentiles or was under Gentile control up until June 6, 1967. June 6, 1967 was referred to as the end of the 6 Day War. It was the day that Israel finally took back Jerusalem and brought it under its own control. It took it out of the hands of the Gentiles. So Jesus is talking about a period, the bulk majority of what he's spoken so far was up to the year of 70 AD. And in one verse, he goes from 70 AD to June 6, 1967. Okay? So I want you to notice that we actually have these markers in our history that happened. That's when this happened, and now this one happened. Okay? Let's continue reading verse 25. And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on earth distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and the waves roaring. Now, now I'm going to tell you what I think. Okay? This part in verse 25, where it says that there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on earth distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and the waves roaring. I think that we are between verse 24 and 25 in the timeline. Okay? But let's keep reading. Men's hearts failing them for fear. Mind you, all of this that we're reading, all of it happens before the beginnings of sorrows in both Matthew and Mark. Okay? Men's hearts failing them for fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory before the beginnings of sorrows. Now, verse 28, when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads because your redemption draws near. So, according to Luke, okay, let's just keep it here in the Gospel of Luke real quick. All right, in verse 28. According to Jesus, there's at least another coming before the ones in Matthew and Mark, which means that we have a post-trib rapture for sure. Okay? But now he's talking about a pre-trib rapture, which is right here in Luke. There's two comings. The one in Luke happens before the one in Matthew and Mark. Because Jesus said these things before all the things that happen, this stuff is going to happen. And here's what say he says it now. When these things begin to happen, that's when they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to happen, then lift up your heads because your redemption draws nigh. Let's keep reading. Verse 29. Then he spoke to them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. And when they are already budding, you see and know for yourselves that summer is now near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that the kingdom of God is near. And assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly, for it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch therefore and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. And look at how it ends. It says, and in the daytime he was teaching in the temple. But at night, he went out and stayed on the mountain of Olives, or the mount called Olivet. Then early in the morning, all the people came to him in the temple to hear him. So again, it's reiterating during the day, Jesus stayed in the temple. This conversation that Jesus is having with the people in the temple is the conversation that now the disciples in Matthew and Mark, because they're the same conversation, okay, that they're asking him about. But he's giving them a whole bunch of details in Matthew and Mark that you don't see here in Luke. And it's different. Okay. And so I want you, and this, by the way, is the whole discussion in Luke chapter 21. This is it. After this, it goes into him preparing for the Passover in the Gospel of Luke. So I want you to notice, okay, that this conversation in Luke is an earlier conversation, but in the chronology of events, it happens before the beginnings of sorrows, which means that when they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and glory, that happens before the beginning of sorrows. And then later you have another coming. See, so it's not either or, it's both and. So I want you to understand that when we talk about the coming of Christ, that when people are, it's just this or just this or just that. No, there's more than one here. Okay. So I want you to kind of like take into some things into account in this Bible study. Okay. Because there's a lot more to these verses, and we haven't gotten into everything yet. But I want you to consider that when it comes time for you to think about the two gospels of Matthew and Mark, it is referring to a future event that happens after the events of Luke. Okay. Uh, Rick, could you please put in here the visual for the um, the side by side verses so that everybody can see what it looks like. Okay. So if you look, Matthew and Mark, they kind of followed along the same trajectory. So if you start going down, when it talks about, okay, so I put in here, take heed that you be not deceived in green, because this is in the timeline in the Gospel of Luke. It kind of puts the cart ahead of the horse. Okay. So if you can do me a favor, can you condense or make it like smaller so you can kind of zoom out a little bit? Can you do that? Good. Keep going, keep going. All right, right there. That's fine. Okay, so if you notice, the green of Luke is supposed to go with the green of Matthew and Mark. Slide down, just go down a little bit. But when you got the blue portion happens before the green. Okay? And then you notice that all of these things in Luke happens before everything that happens in Matthew and Mark. I want you to see the visual of this because this is how the Gospels orientate the sequence of events. That's why they're different. They're not the same. And when you get to, it's interesting when you stop right here, the parable of the fig tree in pink, right? The parable of the fig tree in Matthew and Mark kind of are touching the same things, but they're actually different in that Matthew and Mark talks about a parable of the fig tree. But when you read the Gospel of Luke, okay, it says that he spoke to them a parable. And then he says, behold the fig tree and all the trees. So it's not just about the Matthew and Mark is just about the fig tree. The Gospel of Luke is about the fig tree and all the trees. Okay? And it's interesting because in the Gospel of Luke, when you think about the what trees are people, okay? They're people groups. And it says when they now shoot forth, you see no and know for your own selves that that summer is now nigh at hand. So likewise, when you see these things come to pass, know that the kingdom of God is nigh at hand. Verily I say to you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words will shall not pass away. Take heed to yourselves, lest any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness, and the cares of this life, so that they come upon you unawares. For as a snare shall it come on all them that dwell in the face of the whole earth. All right, I want you to notice there are some details that I kind of want to highlight between the gospels that you may not have noticed before, but are actually there in the actual text themselves. Okay, so when you compare the gospels side by side and you look at the details provided in each one, okay, there is a excuse me, there is a some interesting teachings that come after the dialogue of the last days. Okay. In the Gospel of Matthew, he talks about a faithful and wise servant and then an evil servant. All right. And then he talks about the 10 virgins, five wise and five foolish. And then he talks about the talents and he talks about the judgment of the nations with the sheep and the goat and the discussion with the disciples about the upcoming Passover is what comes after that. Okay. In the Gospel of Matthew, I'm sorry, Mark, he talks about a faithful and wise servant and the evil servant. So again, he's very much in line with Matthew, right? But then after that, he goes into the discussion about Passover. However, in the Gospel of Luke, he doesn't go on to teach anything else after that. And it immediately goes to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, followed by the Passover account. All right. So these are some of the details that, again, I want to highlight and I want you to kind of consider. All right. The location of the Mount of Olives in Matthew and Mark are both located in the Mount of Olives, whereas Luke is located in the temple. In Matthew and Mark, the audience is the disciples in private. In Luke, the audience is a mixed crowd in public. Okay. In both Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they share in the beginnings of sorrows. However, the chronology in Luke that follows after the beginnings of sorrows, all of that happens prior to. Okay. There's some minor details also in the way that Jesus says certain things. Like, for example, when he talks about the Son of Man, the actual coming, right? In Matthew and Mark, it says that they see the sign of the Son of Man first, and then the Son of Man is seen in the clouds, and it's plural. This happens last, and that's after the beginning of sorrows. This is the last thing that happens. Okay. The same thing happens in Mark. Both Matthew and Mark, the Son of Man is seen in the clouds, plural. There's plural clouds. However, in the Gospel of Luke, it says that the Son of Man is seen by the people coming in a cloud, singular. Okay. And this happens first before the beginnings of sorrows. Now, why is this significant? Okay. Uh, because I want to show you another verse, Rick, I really apologize for not giving you this verse earlier. Okay. But in First Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17, all right, it says that when it talks about that when the Lord takes us, it says, then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds, plural, to meet the Lord in the air. And so shall we ever be with the Lord. So I want you to notice that when we are caught up, we're caught up in the clouds. all right, with them, okay, with those that who have died before us, okay? But yet in the Gospel of Luke, we see Jesus coming in a single cloud, and not only that, but when even though he's coming in a single cloud, we see other passages where Jesus is caught up in a cloud. We know when in the mountain of transfiguration that he was covered up in a cloud, right? When Jesus was on the day of his ascension, when he ascended up, that he ascended up in a cloud. Okay. As a matter of fact, when he ascends up on a cloud, he tells there's two angels there. It's actually in Acts chapter 1. It says that that there were two men standing there that in dressed in white, and they turned to the disciples and it says, "Why do you stand there gazing up into heaven? The same Jesus which is taken up from you into heaven shall so come in like manner as you have seen him go into heaven." Right? So he's taken up in a cloud, and in Luke you see him come down in a cloud. When you look at us in Thessalonians, we're going up to meet them in the clouds. So what I'm trying to explain to you is that if you were to look at it from just a an economic sense, it's one cloud per person, right? So each one of us are going to be taken up in a cloud. So it's a bunch of us, it's a bunch of us in clouds. But in Luke, he's only coming down in one cloud. Why? Because in Matthew and Mark, he is coming in the clouds, plural, of heaven, because in Matthew and Mark, he's coming with his people. In Luke, he's coming for his people. That's why there's a singular cloud. Okay. And again, there's more. Excuse me. In both Matthew and Mark, okay, the gathering itself of the elect and everything, when God's people come together, that's at the end of all things. That's the closing of history as we know it, where that's like the end of the end. That's the entire dialogue of both Matthew and Mark is about the end times, the end, the last days, okay? The last of the last days. Matthew and Mark are both talking about the end. But when it comes to the Gospel of Luke, he says it's different. He says that it's that the timing of the end, okay, is he says that when these things begin to happen, it's because it's the beginning of our redemption. In Matthew and Mark, it's the end of all things. In Luke, it's the beginning of our redemption. Another thing, if you look at both Matthew and Mark, they both expressly mention the tribulation and the great tribulation. But if you paid attention, no tribulation is mentioned in the Gospel of Luke. There is no tribulation there. Tribulation doesn't apply because the tribulation, the great tribulation happens after the events in Luke. Okay. Um, and so there's a lot of these details that when you start to look at the comparison between them, you begin to see, oh, wait a minute, the Gospel of Luke is talking about events, the bulk majority of which were 2,000 years ago, which because of those events, people have come up with all kinds of theories, which is where preterism has come up with the idea that they believe that the millennium started like 2,000 years ago after 70 AD. They think that everything that's happened in the past, and it's because of this. But the reason why they make the mistake is that they're overlapping Luke with Matthew and Mark and assuming that they're all the same when in fact they're not. They're actually completely different events. Okay. So I know we did a lot of reading so far. So Suleim, uh, I'd like for you to, do you have any questions so far? Because I think I'm going to pause it here so that I don't go any further. I think we can probably pick it up the next time.
No, I just have questions if you have copies of this, so I can have one.
Yeah,
Can I?
yeah. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think, let me see here. You want to, what's his? Rick, can you post it into the chat?
Do
Yes.
you have it describing like the different colors? Just so I
Yeah,
can study later.
yeah, yeah. Everything that he put up on the screen is actually the Excel spreadsheet that I made up for it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it easier for me when it's aligned in that way because it helps me understand the word a lot better because I notice when I just read the Bible, it's kind of like, I don't know, for my mind, I just need more colors and things to separate it for me to understand it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I got you. If you look, I put it up in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay? It's in the chat.
I
So
got it.
that way you can see everything in comparison there.
Oh, this is cool. This is really cool.
Yeah. So when people tell you, okay, that, well, I'm a post-trib or pre-trib. I actually had this conversation with with what's his name, with Jamal, and we actually went over the details in this, and I don't know if you knew this, but Jamal is hardcore post-trib, right? So everything that we read in Matthew and Mark is all post-trib. And he's like, yeah, I'm set. Then I had him read Luke 21. And when he realized that there's another coming before the one in Matthew and Mark, he's like, what the heck? This totally messed me up. He got so angry. He got so upset because now he had to acknowledge that there was a coming before the post-trib, which means like, wait a minute. Why why is that the case? Well, the next session that we do, the next time we do this Bible study, I'm going to go over the details highlighting why there's actually not just a post-trib and a pre-trib, but that there's also a mid-trib involved. And the next session that we do, I'm going to go over all the details as to why that is the case, because it has to be the case. There's no way around it because of the words of Jesus. So I wanted to talk about the end times from the words of Jesus rather than just going to the Revelation, because Revelation's great, but the sequence of events is provided for us by Jesus in the Gospels. And when you account for what he said, it changes the dynamic of what you're reading. Because now you realize, oh, wait a minute. According to the Gospel of Luke, there's a pre-trib rapture that happens before all of this stuff in Matthew and Mark. Did you see it though, Suleen? Did you see it there? You're muted. I can't hear you.
I think I think the only thing that's confused me for like ever, because I've even had this talk with my mom, was the 1,000 years. Because this is the way my mom described it to me, and I don't know if I believed it all the way through because it doesn't make sense the way she explained it. Where she said that, let me know if I'm wrong, that God would be here, right? The new heaven would be here, be for 1,000 years, right? And then supposedly, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but the devil has another chance to tempt us while here on earth, to see if we get deceived. Like that's so confusing to me.
Okay. Okay. So what you're asking about is the details given in the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
So the 1,000-year reign happens after the tribulation period. Okay. After the tribulation, after the Antichrist is, thrown in the lake of all that stuff. Because the Antichrist is thrown into the lake of fire. Okay. Right
Mhm.
when Jesus comes. When he shows up at the end of the great tribulation, the Antichrist is thrown in there. Okay. And then when he sets up his kingdom, it says that right when he arrives, it says that a great angel with a chain gets Satan and binds him in chains of darkness for, I think, like 1,000 years. So that during the millennial reign of Christ, during that first 1,000 years, Jesus is going to rule and reign from Jerusalem as king over the whole earth. And during that time, there are certain conditions that are going to be imposed because God has to fulfill the promises that he made to the nation of Israel. Okay? During that 1,000 year reign. After the 1,000 years are fulfilled, are completed, Satan is released from his prison. He's actually released. And he's going to gather the nations again to try to bring them against Christ and his kingdom. And this is after the 1,000 years. And there's a reason for that. Okay. One of the biggest aspects about the creation account leading up to the end of the world is that everybody is always trying to blame God for something. All of humanity is always trying to point a finger at him. Okay. The problem with pointing the finger at God at that time is that they have 1,000 years at which the environment is perfect. There's nothing that's going to be out of order in the kingdom of Christ when he comes. And during that 1,000 year reign, nobody is going to be able to say the environment is I'm a product of my environment. They can't do that.
Yeah.
You understand? So that 1,000 year period, the earth is going to be renewed. There's not going to be any more sickness or disease. There's not going to be any more war. It's all going to be, instant judgment. Now, the problem is that the 1,000 year period is not going to be heaven on earth. It's going to be a conditional situation under which all of the governments of the world are going to be forced to worship Jesus as king. You understand? So even though the environment is perfect, there's going to be perfect justice, instant justice for everything. It's not going to be easy for the nations that hate God because they're not going to be born again when Jesus shows up. It's that God is going to create a period of time in which their environment is going to be near perfect, but they're still going to repent. They're still going to rebel because it's going to prove to the human race before the final end judgment of all things that the problem is on the inside of us. It's not in the world. It's not outside. It's on the inside. You understand? So that period of 1,000 years is a period in which God is going to fulfill all his promises to Israel, and He's going to establish the basis to demonstrate an experiential demonstration that the problem is in humanity itself, that they're sinful in that they have to be redeemed. And so after the 1,000 years, everyone who is not redeemed, who still chooses to be upset with Jesus, because the Bible says, I think it's in Isaiah 66, it says that all the families of the earth, that's all the leaders of all the nations of everywhere, it says that they are going to be required to go and worship the king in Jerusalem. They're going to have to worship the Messiah in Jerusalem for during the Feast of Tabernacles. And it says that any nation that refuses to go, because again, that during that time they're going to not be happy with everything. It says that upon them there will be no rain. So if they refuse to come to Jerusalem and they refuse to worship Jesus the Messiah, then their punishment is going to be no rain, which means all their crops are going to die. They're not going to have any water for anything. People are going to, there's the judgment is going to be severe on that nation. You understand? So by the end of the 1,000 years, there's going to be some animosity. And at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is loosed one last time. And then he's going to gather the nations for the final conflict where he's going to gather uh, all of the armies of the earth that are opposing God.
Yeah.
And God at that point destroys them all with fire. Literally, fire comes out of heaven and destroys everybody. Everybody. And then that's when the great white throne, that's when suddenly, all right, they're like, all right, now let's gather everyone and we're going to judge everybody. That is when it happens. Because you have to understand, there are details regarding the judgments. Judgment doesn't happen all at once. The book of Daniel says that some will wake up to everlasting righteousness. It's talking about the resurrection, right? It says some will wake up to everlasting righteousness, and others will wake up to everlasting shame and contempt. That verse is loaded because when you compare that to the book of Revelation, that means that the resurrection of the righteous and the resurrection of the wicked has a 1,000 year gap. The righteous are resurrected first to get the rewards and everything, and the resurrection of the wicked, which is for judgment, comes 1,000 years after. So the 1,000 years is a period of time where certain conditions have to be met to fulfill promises that the prophets made in the Old Testament for Israel, but to set just lay down the foundation for the judgment that's to follow after thereafter. I hope that makes sense.
Yeesh. There's
Yeah.
so much to it. My God.
Well, if you read the book of Revelation actually tells you that after the 1,000 years are fulfilled, then Satan is released for a short season to gather the nations to come against his kingdom again. But
It's yeah. I
it,
just think it sucks to give the devil even more extra time when he's already did enough, you know? It just
but that's the thing. But this is where I think that you're misunderstanding. God never gave dominion to Satan. He gave it to mankind. And this whole thing is in an effort to provide the most chances for mankind to get it right. The 1,000 year reign of Christ, there are people who are going to hate Jesus and going to hate his kingdom, but there are also people who are going to love him and they're going to want to stay faithful to him. You understand?
Mhm.
So it's a sense the 1,000 year reign is so that as many people of the human race from all nations have the opportunity where God is not interested in just destroying everybody all in one day. He wants to give the opportunity for everyone to repent, even to the uttermost, even to the very last minute. It's an expression of God's mercy to the human race, where he just doesn't cut it off like, "Ah, I showed up, you're all dead, now go to hell." It's not like that. God has phases that he does everything because he wants to extend mercy to as many people as he can, which is why this sort of thing, this is where a lot of us we don't realize that God is extending mercy even to the uttermost.
I thought it was just straight up like rapture. He brings whoever he needs to bring with him. Everybody over here just goes through crap, and that is it.
Well, even when you look at the parables of Jesus, when he talks about how he will take the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left.
Mhm.
Sheep get judged first, right? And they receive the reward. But the goats happens 1,000 years later. But in the parable that Jesus gives, he doesn't explain that timeline because he doesn't need to. But that is explained further in more clarity when you get to the book of Revelation, which is why those things are given the way it is. I think he said it the way he does for brevity sake.
Mhm. Jeez. Okay.
Jamal, you got anything?
Yeah, I'm listening as like an insider. So this is the second time hearing it. I missed a lot of. I got to put the kids down and everything, but uh, that sheep on the right and goats on the left. I remember you said that. Well, I mean, you said it a bunch of times in our talks, but um, I never thought of 1,000 years later because I'm not as familiar with the millennial reign and such because, well, you know why I'm. But I'd like for you to go into that more. Not tonight. It's already 9:40, but I'd like to call you on that one time because I
Yeah.
got to hash it out because I believe that, and I believe you taught me this as well, that one thing can mean more than one thing.
Mhm.
That is not grammatic. I don't know if that's grammatically correct, but like Revelation, I remember you saying that there are things on a local scale, a countrywide scale, and a global scale. So
Yeah.
that's why there's like different things can apply. So a lot of what I looked at Revelation is the time period of right now, you know, and I think that that's okay, but I never looked into the future aspect of it because of how confusing it could get. And I don't want people to think that they have to be a scholar to serve Jesus. But
Well,
that doesn't mean that there aren't scholarly things that I don't know about.
here's the thing. The Bible says that it is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to search it out. And he has called us to be a race of kings. He wants us to search it out. He wants us to, you know, to learn how to parse these things. But we also have to remember, I think a lot of people will look at the book of Revelation and try to put things in a certain chronological order in a book of Revelation as if that's going to make some sense. I don't think that that's the right way to do it. For one thing, the book of Revelation is parsed in different order on purpose. He tells you right from the beginning that these are the things which are, and the things which were, and the things which shall be. Present, past, future. Present, past, future, right? And so the book of Revelation has elements that are in the present, and elements that are in the past, and elements that are in the future. So you can't use the book of Revelation to solid for solid chronology. But you can go to the words of Jesus in the Gospels for that chronology. And when you consider that the book of Revelation provides details that the Gospels do not, it's because it helps you to refine and broaden your understanding. So, like for example, you mentioned about the 1,000 years, and the 1,000 years, you see that the resurrection of the just mentioned. It's actually also in Daniel, and I mentioned it earlier to Salim. The resurrection in Daniel says that some will rise to everlasting righteousness, and others will rise to everlasting shame and contempt. When you go to the book of Revelation, you see that the righteous are raised first, but then it's not until the 1,000 year after the 1,000 year millennial reign of Christ that all of that is actually happening for the wicked. So the righteous are resurrected first, and then after the 1,000 years is when the wicked. So when you go to the parable of Jesus in Matthew, he says, "Then shall the king say to those on his right hand, and he shall say to those on his left hand." Well, from the perspective of the kingdom, there's no concept of time, but the details are provided in Revelation, in the book of Revelation. That's the Apocalypse, where he unveils details there that he doesn't give elsewhere. But that's the understanding that there's a 1,000 year gap at least between the righteousness, the resurrection of the righteous, and the resurrection of the wicked.
And I'm appreciative to hear that. And now it's recorded so I can get it.
It is recorded. You're right. All right. Well, if you guys got not no other questions, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording. We are gonna pick this up again next week, and and I will post a link to this in Scopus today. So as soon as I get it converted over and it gets recorded, I'm gonna post it, and then I'm gonna recommend that anybody who did not participate in today's study because they weren't able to attend, I recommend they watch the video first before joining in next Thursday. All right. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording right now.